All right, we've had two parts so far to our PowerPoint video. In the last one, we ended with the step 2, going on to the process cost report for the assembly department, in which we show the equivalent units that we calculated, that we have 50,000 equivalent units of direct materials and 42,500 equivalent units of conversion costs. So we go on to step 3 of our cost production report. We have to compute the cost per equivalent unit. Now, so far, we just dealt with the units. We figured out how many the flow of the physical units, and we figured out the equivalent units of production of the physical units. But we haven't dealt with anything with the cost. Now, back in the first or the second slideshow, we showed all the costs, and so we'll be repeating that. Okay, so the assembly department has to account for the costs associated with the work, with the 8,000 units that came from June that were in there to begin with, plus the costs that were put in to complete those 8,000 units. So we had costs back in June to get those 8,000 started. Now we have costs in July to finish those 8,000. Plus we have costs to start from scratch 42,000 units. So all of those costs have to be accounted for. We use the weighted average method to combine all the costs that were added during the period into one cost pool. A cost pool is an accumulation of all those individual costs. Okay, so the total costs will be accounted for include direct materials and conversion costs. Remember, the conversion costs include direct labor and overhead. Okay, and we're going to divvy those out between the beginning work in process plus the costs added during the period. And this will give us the total cost that we need to account for. So here is those costs reiterated that we had back in the second PowerPoint video. We have direct materials. We had 9,800. This is from the beginning 8,000 units from June. We had 9,800 in direct materials and 3,910 in conversion costs that we already did in June. So that's a total of $13,710 that's sitting in work in process assembly department for the beginning of July, because this all came from June. Now, during July, we added 130,200 of direct materials and 64,090 in conversion costs. Some of that belongs to the finishing up the 8,000, and some of it belongs to the 42,000 that we started. So our total direct materials is the 900 that we already had to start with from June, plus the 130,000 we put in this month, and so we have a grand total of $140,000 that we need to account for direct materials. Conversion costs, we had 3,910 to start with. We added 64,090, so that's a total of 68,000. And so our grand total is $208,000 worth of costs, direct materials, direct labor, overhead, that the manager of the assembly department needs to account for. Now, what we need to do in step 3 is compute the cost per equivalent unit. So these are the total costs here. We want to compute the cost per equivalent unit. So we need, for direct materials, we need to take the total direct material cost, that's this 140,000, divided by the equivalent unit of productions for direct materials. For conversion costs, I need to take the total conversion cost, that's the 68,000, and divide it by how many equivalent units of production do we have for conversion costs. So here's for the direct materials. We have the total cost for direct materials, 140,000, that we need to account for, and we had 50,000 equivalent units of production that we had already calculated back in the second PowerPoint show, okay? And so 140,000 divided by the 50,000 equivalent units for direct materials is $2.80 per equivalent unit for direct materials. Then for conversion costs, we had the total cost that we need to account for, 68,000, that was on the previous slide. We divide that by the 42,500 equivalent units. That was from back in the second PowerPoint show. Okay, 68,000 divided by 42,500 means we have $1.60 per equivalent unit for conversion costs. Now that we have what we need, our information, we can put it on the cost report. So this top part are the parts of the cost report we already did. This here, physical units, is step 1. These equivalent units are step 2. Now we're on step 3, the cost that we need to account for. Okay, so that's the beginning work in process. Direct materials was 9,800, conversion cost 3,910, totaling 13,710. Then the cost added during the period, the 130,000 of direct materials, 64,000 conversion costs, total 194,290. So I add the direct materials, I get 140,000. I add the conversion, I get 68,000. Divide it by the 50,000. Here's my equivalent units for direct materials is 50,000. So 140,000 divided by 50,000 is $2.80 per equivalent unit. Now for conversion costs, I have a total of 68,000. I got to divide it by the equivalent units. That's right here, conversion cost, equivalent units, 42,500. Okay, and I get $1.60 cost per equivalent unit. So that step 3 is now on my cost, production cost report. Now I only have one part left, step 4, the cost that that the manager can account for. Okay, so step 4, we need to assign the costs to units completed and units in process. So they're divided between two outputs. The 40,000 puzzles that we finished in assembly and went on to the cutting department, and the 10,000 partially completed puzzles that are still sitting in assembly. Okay, and we need to take those costs and to divvy them out between the 40,000 and the 10,000. So for our direct materials, we have 40,000 equivalent units times $2.80. That's 112,000. And for direct materials for the 10,000 that are still there, remember direct materials was 100% complete. So we have 10,000 equivalent units times $2.80. So that's 28,000. Add those together, I've now got 140,000. For conversion costs, I have 40,000 equivalent units times $1.60 that we calculated out in step 3. That's 64,000. And 2,500 equivalent units from these 10,000 equivalent units that are still sitting in assembly times 25% complete. That's how we got these 2,500 equivalent units times $1.60 is 4,000. So we now have accounted for $68,000 for the conversion costs. Now we can put this information onto our production report. So we have the 112,000 of direct materials plus the 28,000 of direct materials for the unfinished puzzles, and that gives us 140,000. That matches the 140,000 that I need to account for. I've now accounted for it. Okay? For conversion costs, I need to account for 68,000. I had 64,000 assigned to the completed units and 4,000 assigned to the units that are still in the assembly department. That total 68,000. I've now accounted for the total 68,000 that I needed to account for. Grand total, 112 plus 64 is 176, 28 plus 4 is 32. Add those together. I've accounted for, as manager of the assembly department, 208,000. That's what I needed to account for. My production cost report is now complete. Okay, recalling, here's the 140,000, the 112 and 28, 64 and 4 is the 68. Okay, and that's what we've put on our production report, and we show that everything matches. If everything doesn't match, as the manager, I gotta find out why not. And then that will have to go into my report, and we'll have to decide how